Today's show is in two parts. We'll talk about the unemployment cliff with Laura Khalil, then a Detroit City FC update with Fletcher Sharpe. Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, July 29th, 2020. I'm Jer Stays. Let's just get started. Joining me is Laura Khalil. Her voice has been on the podcast a few times talking about business, what's happening with the economy. Today, well, we have more to talk about. Laura, welcome back. It's good to hear from you.
Jer, thanks for having me.
So I guess the news is that nothing's happening, but that's actually going to mean a pretty big impact for a lot of people.
Yeah, unfortunately, the CARES Act is actually running out at the end of July. And for those people who don't know specifically what the CARES Act means, that means that those PPP loans, those Paycheck Protection Program loans that were helping employers pay their staff to come back, as well as that $600 a week supplement in unemployment benefits is coming to a close. And Jer, the news is we have no news about what's next.
As Washington does, there tends to be a lot of wrangling, but it seems like the deadline has passed so that things would smoothly continue on whatever they decided to do, right?
Right. I mean, if you call mass poverty continuing on, I really think that's where we're headed. Unfortunately, the Republicans have really dug in their heels around working out a plan around this. They've had a couple of months. Democrats have brought this to the table and it has been ignored. And I think that there was a hope, and certainly we all hope, that we could have the pandemic behind us by now. I think that was the hope behind the CARES Act and it running out at the end of July. Unfortunately, with a complete lack of national response to the pandemic coordinated by our government, we are at a point where the numbers in the pandemic continue to rise while the support from government is ending. We know that on Monday evening, the Republicans finally came to the table proposing a $200 a week supplement until states could update their systems to provide 70% of previous income. Unfortunately, there is no system in place for the states to provide 70% of previous income. And $200 a week is quite a slash from that $600 a week supplement. And compounding all of that, Jer, not all Republicans even agree on that. So that proposed bill could not even pass the Senate.
So we've really got three sides at play here. The other thing I would note is that Governor Whitmer, in a press conference on Tuesday, talked about how it would take months to update the state's unemployment system, the technology, all of that, to be able to support doing this 70% benefit, because you have to do it on a case-by-case basis. And in the in-between time, we'd be looking at that $200 a week thing. I will say this, though. I mean, some would argue that part of the point is to force people back to work, right? Because the idea being is there have been a number of stories saying that businesses cannot find workers because people would rather stay at the $600 a week threshold instead of go back to work for less money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is a really complex issue. So there are more than 2.1 million Michiganders who have been certifying for claims since March 15th. So let's just talk about the stakes, because that's part of what's at stake. And to your point, is it true that there are some people who do not want to go to work because they're making more on unemployment? Sure, there's some truth to that. Michigan minimum wage is around $9.45 an hour. That translates to around $18,000 a year, which is just slightly above the poverty line. For a family of four, the poverty line is $26,600. So when people don't want to go to work, if you're making slightly above poverty level wages, I gotta say, I can't blame you when you're earning more with the government. But beyond that issue, which is an issue for sure, we have people who are immunocompromised, who are scared to go back because they might actually die, or they may live with a family member who may die. Many people with children do not have access to daycare, or we're still having big questions around if school is going to happen in person in the fall. I just learned today that I believe it's in Grand Rapids that they are doing all online in the fall. So for people who literally are at the minimum wage, where $600 a week is a windfall for them, friends, that's $2,400 a month. That's not a lot of money. And if that's a windfall for you and you are dealing with where do the kids go in the fall? How do I take care of the family? Or if I'm immunocompromised, many people feel like they just don't have a choice. So it's a complex issue. We can't blame everything on able bodied people who just are lazy and don't want to go back to work.
And when I look at those numbers too, we're talking about something that's in the range at $600 a week. We're talking about in the range of $15 an hour, which is a minimum wage that many people have been pushing for. It's just very difficult to make things work on less than that for a lot of folks.
Right.
All right, let's switch gears over to the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. This was supposed to protect jobs and keep people off of unemployment, but this is something that really seems like it hasn't been utilized to its full potential, and it's running out of time.
Yeah, so the hope with the Paycheck Protection Program, boy, that's a mouthful, Jer.
Right?
The hope with the PPP is that this pandemic would be behind us by now. And unfortunately, what we're seeing, and we're seeing through the increase in unemployment claims, is that the PPP was really a bridge to nowhere. We have seen recently that the number of new unemployment claims rose for the first time in months to 1.4 million. That is as PPP is running out. And I think we are likely to see that number continue to increase as companies realize there may not be the demand for the services that they provide.
Well, and if you're looking at larger companies for clues, I'd note that some businesses are starting to admit, like Google, that things won't change until this time next year. I mean, they didn't need it where people, if they can work from home, they work from home.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard a great story last week about a business who its business was based on doing in-office supplies and services. So if your business is relying on going into another business, guess what? You don't have a business anymore.
For sure. And I believe there's still money in the kitty that hasn't been dispersed yet.
Yep. As of the end of June, 130 billion had yet to be spent, but as we know, that is a drop in the bucket. Democrats are proposing around $3 trillion in relief is still needed. Obviously, our Republican friends would disagree with that amount. But yes, there is still more that has not been spent. But as new outbreaks are spiking around the country, many companies are rethinking their plans to reopen business. And that leaves us all in a very precarious situation.
For sure. All right. I got to ask something very practical here. When we're looking, circling back to that unemployment benefit, I can't help but get out of my mind the idea that people need to get prepared for these cuts because they're coming. And let's be clear, even the best estimates say it's going to be the middle of next month until we have a deal. There may or may not be a stimulus check involved in that. Again, all of this is under negotiation. There's going to be a gap. What can people do on a personal level?
Well, as I was preparing to talk to you about this, Jer, I couldn't help but think it harkens back to the Great Depression. And I know that that is a serious statement, but this is a really serious time. And so I'm going to give some resources for people who really are at the end of the rope and need help. Michigan UIA benefits will continue, but without that supplement. So another option for individuals who are experiencing scarcity in food, housing, cash, paying utilities is to go check out My Bridges, which offers healthcare coverage, food assistance, childcare development and care, cash assistance, and state emergency relief. I would also encourage individuals to check with their own cities. In Detroit, in particular, there are food assistance programs for the children and elderly. There's also a moratorium on evictions in this city that runs, unfortunately, only until August 15th. But the moratorium on foreclosures is through the end of 2020, and individuals can apply for tax relief. Most communities have some sort of food distribution program that is often being run through a religious organization. So I would encourage individuals in your city to begin to look for those if need be.
Laura Khalil, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Before we get to Fletcher, a quick personal note, and I think this will be the last time I'm doing this. The voting date is closing on the 31st, and your support with a free vote at podcastawards.com for Best News in Politics podcast would be greatly appreciated. There's a bunch of other categories, too, with a bunch of worthy podcasts. Support great shows at podcastawards.com. And remember, Daily Detroit is up for Best Podcast in the News and Politics category. Sven, Fletcher, Cheyenne, Randy, and everyone else appreciates it, and so do I. Joining me virtually is Fletcher Sharpe. He is a regular sports correspondent for us. And, of course, we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to both of our hearts, soccer. Specifically, we're going to start with Detroit City FC football. Fletch, seems to be a bit of a disappointing inaugural season finale on multiple levels.
To a degree, yeah. So I was there covering this weekend, and Detroit City's women's side won their first game in club history, first game at home against Lansing United by the tune to 2-1. They got an early goal from Lillian Lucas, like a 25-yard rocket in the corner. Amazing shot. Lansing clawed back with another goal, and then late, I feel bad because it says it was kind of like their first game for the summer. They were playing more of their players to get rhythm, and both their goalkeepers had really good games, but like the 81st or 82nd minute, their goalie had a pass come back to her, and instead of just kicking it out and getting rid of it, she tried to trap it, and it bounced off her foot funny, and then Detroit's forwards were there to take it. Kenna White specifically was there to take it and scoop it into the back of the net for Detroit's first win. They advanced to play Midwest United, who they played earlier and lost 3-1. They lost again in the final, 3-1. To me, the difference in this game, though, the first game, they looked hapless. They were trying their best, but you could tell they didn't really understand like how to play with each other yet, whereas Midwest, that was their third game. This game, it stayed really tight until late. Midwest pulled away later. So, like, even when Midwest got ahead 3-1, Detroit was still keeping the game close. They were still getting good shots. They were still getting pressure. It's just a bit less because at that point, Midwest kind of took over. But I'd say it's a good season for them overall, even though they finished 1-0-2, because it got those players to play with each other. The team's basically going to stay the same for next summer, unless some major things happen. Like, say, Brazilian superstar Marta decides that she's a free agent and wants to come live in the Midwest, and like Detroit happens to snag her. Yes, they'd add 5-time Women's Player of the Year Marta to their roster. But, like, aside from that, the team should relatively stay the same. So it gets them a year to, like, play with each other, because I know most of these girls don't go to the same school, or if they're professionals, or if they're mothers, they have other things they're doing, so they're not around each other all the time. But it gives them a chance to play with each other, introduce themselves to each other. So next summer comes, you have some sort of groundwork with the people there. Considering that Midwest United won their first game of the UWS Showcase 9-0, against Livonia City, people thought Detroit were in for a little bit more trouble. So the fact that they were able to hold their own showed that in a few years they'll probably be able to catch Midwest. I don't think they'll be able to do it next year. I could be wrong, but normally I'm not about these things. But there's a good chance, like in the next 2-3 years, they could become the same level, same caliber of team.
Well, they don't call you the sports pundit for nothing. I mean, but in all seriousness, one thing I was kind of disappointed about, though, specifically, is just the length of the season. Just because of COVID-19, it was just so truncated this year, and we really didn't get as much of a chance as I think the fans would have loved to see of these women players.
Well, for the people who don't understand why the season was so short, number one, COVID was the reason why it was short. Like, I don't want to like undersell that at all, because that's very important. But number two, what used to happen with the Detroit men's team near the end of the season, because a lot of their players were college players and then PSL, colleges would request their players come back to campus. So when a college requests their player back, they're done. Typically, bigger colleges, Michigan State, Syracuse, Notre Dame, etc. When they request their player, like, that's it. And normally the really good teams request their players back as soon as possible. If practice can start May 1st, they want their kid back April 30th. Smaller schools, say your Schoolcraft, Adrian, schools not small and you know what they offer, but small compared relatively to other schools. Those schools typically have more leeway. There's a really good example that involved Detroit. 2 years ago, they played against Midland Odessa, who beat them in the final at Keyworth, actually, in the regional final. And Midland Odessa, soon after that game, had 17 of their roster 23 players have to go back to school.
Wow.
So they had to quickly sign players and hope that the smaller schools let their kids stay on for a bit longer. And they did, and they got to the final. They got beat very badly because they were using players who had never played with the players before. That's what happened here. DCFC's women's team probably would have wanted to play a few more games just to get their feet a bit wet. But, for example, Lillian Lucas, who scored the first goal against Lansing, right after the game, she's like, this is really great. And the next day, boom, Illinois wants me to come back, so I have to go. So that was the end of her summer right there, one game. So it kind of makes you a little sad, but also can make you a little bit happy because it gives you a chance to learn more of the roster. You might know who your star is, but who's the person who's going to back up your star and maybe take over for her when she's unavailable to play. So it really shows how deep your roster can be.
For sure. Now, what's up with the men's team?
The men have the NISA showcase this weekend, which is kind of weird because they're not playing NISA teams. They're playing old rivals. If you follow Detroit from their early years, you've probably heard of something called the Rust Belt Derby.
I do remember that. I used to go to games when they were over at Cass Tech.
It was between Detroit City FC, the Blitzers of FC Buffalo, and the Royals of AFC Cleveland. AFC Cleveland folded because they couldn't pay the league fees, which is odd because they're the league's team. But the players really wanted to play and decided to form SC Cleveland, which is basically the same people, except instead of purple, they're orange. People will be familiar as SC Cleveland beat Detroit their last year in the NPSL in penalty kicks, which was very just devastating for everybody involved. Very feisty game. Both teams played very hard, but you would have hoped Detroit could put them away. I guess it's a regional thing. There are a bunch of small 3-team tournaments involving one professional team from NISA, at least one, and like 2 amateur teams. It's good for the old nostalgic person because it brings you back to the Rust Belt Derby. They won't be competing for that, obviously. I think they retired it. But yeah, the men are back Friday, 7:30. They play Cleveland SC, and they play FC Buffalo Sunday at 3 p.m.
And there will be no fans for this, correct?
Correct. Although I'm sure Northern Guard will find a way to get their smoking robot in, so when goals get scored, they can remotely release smoke bombs from the supporter side.
I saw that. That was absolutely awesome on Twitter.
For the one that I think you saw that delayed the game, no, they were actually on like the wall. They were on the wall, and they released a smoke bomb from the wall as they hung a tifo, and then they got down.
Oh, okay.
Normally when they release smoke, it goes across the field, so it's like fine. They don't normally release smoke the vertical way because when the wind blows, it just carries it all the way down the field. Because press are now in those nice suites on the end line that they made out of the train cars, it just went right into the press box.
Well, if anything, Detroit City FC is colorful. Fletch, thank you so much. You can follow Fletcher Sharpe at Saint FDW on Twitter. And that'll do it for today's show. Some previews of what's ahead on your Daily Detroit. Former NPR and now Forbes reporter Sonari Clinton joins us to talk about the new Ford Bronco podcast he did. And there's a ton of historic Detroit connections that even he didn't know about. Former Detroit Health Director, gubernatorial candidate, and now CNN contributor and author Abdul El Sayed is scheduled to come on. He has a book out, Healing Politics. Should be a very interesting conversation. The Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood has new things up its sleeve. We'll check in. Plus, Sven is, as I record this, on his way to a new recreational marijuana store to look at how the industry is doing here in Metro Detroit. And of course, we'll tell you about the stories you need to know. If you have ideas or feedback, hit me up at jer@dailydetroit.com. And thanks so much for listening. I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you with a mask on around Detroit.